Hello and welcome to this Good Grief Festival event, Children, Grief and Creativity. This is the first in a series of lunchtime talks in support of Dying Matters Week, which brings together communities across the country every year to talk about death, dying and bereavement, and help normalize public openness around dying. My name is Lesel Dawson. I'm an associate professor at the University of Bristol, and I'm delighted to introduce our fantastic panel. Julia Samuel is one of the UK's leading psychotherapists, as well as the founder patron of Child Bereavement UK. She is also the best-selling author of Grief Works, This Too Shall Pass, and most recently, Every Family Has a Story, How We Inherit Love and Loss. Gary Andrews is an artist, cartoonist, and animator who was widowed when his wife Joy died in 2017. His doodle-a-day drawings, begun before Joy's death, became a way for Gary to deal with his grief and make sense of his life with his two children without his wife. Finally, Victoria Tolchard is an art therapist specializing in bereavement support. She works with adults and children for Maggie's in Cambridge and also in her private practice. Before we get started, just a quick reminder about some of the practicalities. We welcome your questions for today's speakers. And to send in a question, just type it into the Q&A function available at the bottom of your Zoom window. We have a lot to get through, but we're hoping to save kind of maybe the last 10-15 minutes for questions. You're also welcome to use the chat function to let us know where you're watching from, if you have technical questions, and also feel free to respond to one another. And finally, this session is being recorded and will be made available on the Grief channel afterwards. So in today's panel, we're exploring the best ways to support children through a bereavement and how creativity and art therapy can help kids express and process loss. Julia, if I could start with you, can I ask you, what are some of the key things we should keep in mind when we are supporting children who are grieving?
I think one of the main things is that children grieve and feel loss and pain and bereavement as much as adults. I think there is more knowledge now, but very much in the past it was children are amazing, they bounce back, and sort of what you don't tell them isn't going to hurt them, and let them just sort of protect them from any suffering. And what we now know is that they do experience grief, but they share it in different ways. But they need as much support and connection and information as all the adults around them. And how they learn to grieve is by what is modeled around them. So if they're within a family system where, you know, painful feelings, grief isn't expressed, isn't named, isn't acknowledged, that becomes their norm, and that's what they believe they should do, and they find ways of blocking their own feelings.
I think that last point is so important, because I think often parents feel that they shouldn't cry or show their pain, but actually what you're saying is it's so important to normalize it, to be able to share grief with children so that they too can express those feelings and not feel shame or guilt about them.
And I think, you know, I reverse it. I think adults feel much more childlike when they're grieving. And so if adults could model this idea of jumping in and out of puddles, that they can show children they're very sad or very angry or very numb or scared or whatever the feeling is, and then jump out of that puddle and get on and cook them supper or give them a bath and read them a story, children learn that feelings don't kill you, feelings aren't scary, and they learn that they can have those feelings. But they find different ways of expressing them, which is why today's session is so important. They don't often have language, or not such clear language about them.
Thanks. That really leads me, you talked about puddle jumping, and that really leads me to my second question. Do children in general grieve differently from adults?
I mean, I think what is below the waterline, what isn't said, is very much the same for adults and children. The feeling of fear, of confusion, the kind of importance of slowly coming to face the reality of what's happened to them, that the significant person, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a parent, has died, and that death is permanent and irreversible. And I think one of the big things with children in particular that we need to think about is their developmental age of understanding. So children under 6 have magical thinking. So if you say to a child, you know, we've lost Granny, they lose things every day and they find them again under their bed or under the pillow. So we need to speak in very concrete, literal language that children learn that when Granny has died, that means that she isn't coming back, that her body doesn't work anymore, and she's died, not lost.
Thank you. Gary, can I turn to you? Can you say something, just reflecting a bit on what Julia said?
It's very interesting, listening to what she said, because that just echoes very strongly. I mean, when Joy died, the first thing I said when I had to tell my children was, "Mummy's died." I didn't want to use those other words because it didn't make any sense to me to do that. I wanted them to know, and they knew what death was because we'd had a cat that died, so you know we'd had that. So, I mean, I think that is so vitally important not to use euphemisms around children, but you can tell them kindly, but you still have to use the right words. I think that's absolutely right. And the other thing that I found very interesting in what Julia was saying was the thing about how they express themselves in different ways, and actually how we can learn from them. It was a couple of days after Joy died, my son was getting really frustrated one evening, and he just said, "I'm really angry," and I just said, "Let it go, mate," and he pounded out on the sofa, you know, and till he was exhausted, and a couple of nights later when they were in bed, I felt that anger welling up in me, and I remembered what he'd done, and I did the same thing, and I'd learned from him. So I think it does go both ways, and that was really fascinating to hear you say that. I mean, with us, sorry, I think I dived in before you actually asked me a question because I was so interested.
Okay, no, you're great.
But what was the actual thing you wanted me to say?
Well, it was just what you were covering, kind of thinking about what she'd said about your own experiences.
Yeah.
And and I think what you say about, you know, speaking in concrete language, being really clear is so important, telling children the truth. But also what you say about anger, because I think anger is an emotion that sometimes people are surprised about with grief.
Took me by surprise that I felt it that way, and that by expressing it that way, it helped so much. And the other thing that Julia said, which at the beginning of that sentence I had in my head and it's completely gone away again. There was one other thing you said just now. It's gone away. You talk and it will come back to me.
Can I add 2 things, Gary, to what you're saying? One is that anger is an expression of hurt. Yeah. So often it's thought of as something that's threatening and bad and has to be suppressed. But actually it's like, oh, I'm hurting and I'm scared. And often grief feels like fear and it feels like anger. And I think our instinct is quite rightly, to protect children. Yeah. But when we protect them from the truth and from their feelings, we then block them from being able to process them because they don't have the information. They don't have a way of expressing their feelings, which allows them to heal.
And that does remind me of the other. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I say that reminded me from saying that. The other thing that I was thinking, was that thing about saying to them to allow them to show their emotions, that you're going to show yours. And I said to them at the beginning, you're going to see me crying. I'm not going to hide it from you. Don't feel that you have to hide it from me. That was a conversation we had like within 12 hours of it happening, you know. So everything you said just completely resonated exactly with my experience. Yeah.
You've got amazing instincts. I mean, that, you know, you must have learned well from your own parents.
Well, I lost both of mine. I didn't. They both died by the time I was 30. So I'd been through grief before, and I guess just instinctively, from going through that and from the mistakes and things that went right on that time, it kind of just happened naturally. So that when it all happened, it just seemed to make sense to me to just be open. You know, it's so painful and so negative to hide anything anyway in life, and even more so around something as huge as this.
Yeah.
Gary, can I pick you up now on creativity? You know, you were doing Doodle a Day before Joy died, and you continued drawing a day. about your life after. And I'm interested to know how creativity helped you and your children express and process grief.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it became instantly a kind of self-counseling. It was a way of like letting things out of the pressure cooker. If I felt a thing in the day, whether it was positive or negative, I could write it down, especially the negative ones, rather than holding it inside and festering and going to sleep. If I drew it, it like let that little bit out, and I felt that very healing. I could say stuff on paper that you couldn't necessarily say. And if there was nobody around that evening to talk to, by putting it on my doodle and putting it out to my friends, it let them know where I was. So it was kind of very helpful for me like that. And I included Joy in the dialogue. Although she died, she was very present to me still. So I used to keep her in the drawings and stuff. And that was really helpful to sort of keep that dialogue going with her, if you like. And my children, they both had their own forms of creativity they were using. My son did a bit of drawing. My daughter got very into sort of writing poems and stuff. And that's sort of come back a bit now. But also they sort of used it vicariously through my drawings. They would look at my drawings every day. What have you done today? And they could go, oh yeah. And every time Mummy turned up in the picture, they would talk about her, and they could look back through the last few pages and see what I'd been feeling a few days before if they were feeling it. So it was a way of communicating between us, and it fired conversations between us. I think that's really how it worked with us.
Amazing.
That's really lovely. Yeah. And I mean, one thing I was always and still am struck by is that I feel as if people who are grieving, they feel the presence of the person who's died so strongly, but it's hard to convey sometimes the sense of that presence to other people.
Yeah.
And the drawings make visible the felt presence of joy.
It's a feedback I've had from people that look at them. Yeah, some people say, oh, that's exactly what I feel. I didn't know how to express it to anybody, but it's, yeah, that feeling that they're with you. And I always draw her in this slightly more ethereal form when she's there, but she's engaging in a way she would in life, laughing at funny stuff, comforting in sad moments, supporting. And you still feel that, don't you? And I mean, and so it was nice to be able to express that, and for them to sort of realize that they could feel that too. That the kids could, because they obviously, when someone has died and they're gone, they don't know if they can still access them, and to know that I was doing that and that they could do that, I think that just gave them permission, if you like, to have her there for them,
Absolutely. And it seems to me also that the art object, as you say, gives people something to focus on in conversations. I mean, with your kids, but also with your friends. It strikes me that people do feel awkward. They've asked a question, how are you doing, over and over again, but actually having a daily prompt of this is how I'm feeling.
After certain posts, sometimes if it was a dark one where I was out, I'd post it, and then you'd get the messages coming through. You okay? Do you want me to come around? Anything I can do? You'd get your commute, because it's so hard. We live in a very busy society, and having this social media way to sort of communicate was really useful to keep the friendship circle engaged. And the thing that's important to say, I think, at this point as well, is you don't have to be an artist to use art. And I think obviously we're going to come on to that in a bit. I'm sure Victoria's going to go into that in more detail, I'm sure. But I've done some workshops with people about this sort of thing. I said, even if you just get a set of coloured pens and just scribble in the colour that you feel today, that's enough. Or the patterns you're making, are they scribbly? If you're angry, are they smooth? If you're calm, that in itself is just as valid as a drawing that looks like something, but
yeah. And they're
heading into Victoria's zone there. So.
Yeah, no, but they all link together nicely. Sure. I mean, another thing, there's other kinds of creativity too that aren't sort of art but are still creative. And one of the things I was really struck by in our conversations was the blanket that was made. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a friend who's an incredible seamstress, and she just offered to do a memory blanket. So we went through together with me and the kids a load of Joy's clothes, and ones that we particularly liked but that wouldn't be passing on to them for whatever reason. I mean, Lily now wears a lot of Joy's clothes. She's grown up big enough she can wear them, which is fantastic. But at that time, there were certain ones that wouldn't be right. So we passed a box of those onto this friend, and she made this beautiful big blanket out of a patchwork of a load of her clothes that we recognize and wear. And it's coming up 5 years now, and it's on our sofa every day, and when we watch TV, it goes around one of them, and
Wow.
this constant reminder of her presence and the memories that evokes, but in a really positive, comforting way, because it's like getting a hug from her every day, you know. It's a beautiful thing, and it's incredibly well made. I mean, you know, it was so good. Yeah, it's a very beautiful sort of heirloom, if you like.
Can I add something there, which is that often we avoid the connection to the person that's died because it's painful, because you kind of think, you know, going there is going to hurt me, so I'm going to turn away. But having something that is both passive and active in the form of her blanket on your sofa, that is a very kind of tangible presence when grief is so invisible. But also, if you're busy doing other stuff, you can ignore the blanket. But when you're feeling stuff that is painful or grieving or whatever the different versions are, you can interact with it and embrace it and feel embraced by it.
Absolutely.
So it has an incredible multi-faceted way of keeping all of you close to joy and connected to joy without overwhelming you, because sometimes the things that we do to remember can feel too intense, like going to the memory box, or which can be very useful and important. But something like that is so, and I've had other people do it too, is so beautiful and so creative.
And, you know, a blanket's great, but cushions are fine. You know, if you haven't got the time or the skill, or whatever. I mean, luckily I had a friend who was this incredible seamstress, but, you know, pretty much anybody could probably put a cushion cover together, or even a patch for a cushion, and you've got just something that you've got a thing that you can hold, that it's
go to bed with.
Yeah, exactly. It was wonderful.
And nice to think about Lily wearing Joy's clothes, and it's sort of, it also suggests the way that different objects might connect to children at different moments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They're actually sort of keeping more than you think you might need, so that as they grow and their grief changes and evolves over time, they can connect with
exactly that. Yeah, they were in the loft in a box, and we just cleared the loft recently for various reasons, and the boxes came down, so it was a chance to go through them again, you know. And when we did, it was like, well, yeah, I love that one, I love that one, I love that one, I love that one, but on mummy, not on me, which I thought was an interesting thing to hear. But she kept about a quarter of the stuff that we'd kept for when she grew into it, you know, and it's there was a big wash load, and that was interesting to see all her washing hanging up again, you know.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it was quite powerful, but it was incredibly moving in a wonderfully in a positive way. It was, yeah. Anyway,
I wonder as well if the ones that she didn't choose, you could then actually they have a choice in making them into something, because as children grow through that, it's 5 years, and actually their ideas would be different as well. There's all these great potential. It's an ongoing process, isn't it, as we all know, you know. So to be able to revisit it a few years on was actually fascinating. I wasn't expecting the sort of emotions it threw up. It was actually really, but they were rather wonderful on the whole, which was pleasing. It could have been quite traumatic, but it turned out to be rather lovely. So
it sounds beautiful. I think this probably brings us to the perfect place, really, to show our short film, our first short film, and which is Children, Grief and Creativity, which Julia, Gary and I created together, and also features Gary's 2 children, Lily and Ben. And in fact, the story we were just talking about with the blanket is the inspiration for some of the final images of this film. So the film is 6 minutes long, so enjoy, and we'll all come back together and talk more when it's over.
Children, grief and creativity. It is important to tell children the truth.
The death of a parent or sibling is one of the most fundamental losses a child can experience. Children can also feel grief at the death of a grandparent, a friend, or a beloved pet. They need support to make sense of what has happened, as unresolved grief can have a long-lasting impact on their mental health.
While it is natural to want to protect children from pain, it is important they are told the truth in simple, age-appropriate language. Enabling them to make sense of the events taking place will help them adjust to the fact that someone they love has died.
Children need to understand what death means.
Some children may only have a limited notion of death and find it difficult to take in what has happened. They might even expect their loved one to return. They need to have death explained to them in concrete, age-appropriate language to understand that the body stops working after death and that death is permanent and irreversible.
Perhaps remind them of a time they saw a dead animal in the garden or on the road.
Children might also be comforted by the knowledge that death is also a natural part of life. All living things have a beginning and an end, a birth and a death. Everything grows and everything dies.
We only heal by allowing ourselves to feel the pain of grief.
Children should be encouraged to ask questions and express their feelings openly. They also need to be reassured that their emotions, whatever they may be, are valid.
Children need lots of love and attention. After a bereavement, it is especially important that they feel connected to the people they love and trust. They need to know that they are loved. This is often best expressed through affection, such as hugs.
Adults shouldn't tell children not to cry, but should comfort them whatever they're feeling. It is also good to maintain children's usual routines and rules, as this will preserve some sense of normality and will help them to feel safe and looked after.
Adults shouldn't hide their grief.
Children will look to their caregivers to learn how to behave. Therefore, it is important that parents and other caregivers express their emotions in front of their children, showing them that it is normal to feel grief as well as joy. If adults never show their sadness, children might think that they should not express their feelings either. They might deny or repress their emotions, or become confused about their grief, something that can lead to problems later. Equally, children should be reassured that it is okay to feel happy, that it is not wrong or disloyal to feel moments of joy.
Children may experience grief differently to adults.
Whereas bereaved adults might describe their grief as walking in a tumultuous ocean where every step is difficult and they're often struck by powerful waves, bereaved children tend to experience grief like jumping in and out of puddles.
When children are sad, they jump in the puddle and cry, or get angry, withdrawn. After they're comforted and feel better, they are able to jump out of the puddle and return happily to their activities.
Children should be encouraged to do both. They need time to focus on their loss and time where they can think about other things and enjoy their lives.
Creativity and grief.
A bereavement can unleash powerful emotions of anger, guilt, and regret, as well as sadness. Grief can therefore feel like a scary monster that needs to be kept shut up within us in a tightly closed box. Creative activities and art therapy can provide a safe structure for us to get these emotions out in verbal and non-verbal ways. They can help children be less frightened of their feelings, enabling them to feel the pain of loss and adjust gradually to what has happened.
For children as well as adults, drawing, painting, dancing, singing and writing can give physical and concrete forms to feelings. They can offer new perspectives on our emotions and memories, helping us to remember the person who has died and keep them within us as a part of our lives and ourselves.
Grief is a lifelong process that children will revisit at different phases of their lives. The love and support they receive at the time of bereavement and beyond is crucial to building their resilience, enabling them to accommodate what has happened. For it is only by remembering those we love and incorporating them within us that we can heal. Grief is a painful but important part of life that needs to be respected and supported. Its presence is a reminder not only of what we have lost, but also of who we have loved.
So we did have, before I kind of move on, and just to say thank you to everybody for that. I always really enjoy seeing your beautiful animations, Gary, and seeing your kids. And it kind of brings together a lot of the advice we've been talking about, really, the kind of key information. I also just wanted to sort of bring in one of the comments that have come in on the Q&A, which goes back to some of the things that both you, Gary, and Julia have been saying. It's about an observation, really. And the person talks about when their father died when they were 9 and their brother was 6. And we didn't want to see our mother cry because it upset us. And possibly as a result of that, the mum sort of didn't show her grief and tried to cope. And so they didn't talk about their father at all. And now this person feels that they've really missed out on knowing their father in a way that they might have done if they had allowed that grief to be present and shared it through doodles or by talking about it. So I mean, that's a sort of really interesting comment, just thinking about the long-term impact on stifling, hiding grief, and how it's not just emotional expression, but, you know, the kinds of conversations and sharing that can take place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we might move on now a little bit to Victoria and art therapy. Victoria, can I ask you to explain the role of art therapy in grief? What actually happens in an art therapy session, and how can it be beneficial?
So the child has access to lots and lots of different art materials, paints, clay, pens, oil pastels. I tried to bring in lots and lots of different things. Actually, it's interesting what that person just asked, actually, because I think it gives them a space to explore their story. So even if the adult or family members that are present for them aren't able to do the work, then art therapy gives the child an opportunity to do the work themselves. So we think about all of those different emotions and feelings. Lovely in that video where the boy has a kind of a dragon feature behind him. So we can really bring alive for children what that feels like for them. What shape is it? What color is it? Does it change shape over time? Is it present all the time? Does it sometimes kind of go away? And you can use that in lots of different emotions. And saying that it's okay to get to know those feelings. Children don't have the same kind of ways to talk about the language that we do. So just giving them an opportunity to get to know what those big feelings and emotions are for themselves. And they'll be different for every child as well, which is lovely. So it invites that into the room. And I think once you've got it then on the page, you can then, it becomes real, but you can then start to have a conversation about it and talk about how you can let it in and out of different situations for them, and not to be afraid of it.
That's lovely. Yeah. So kind of children can communicate through art and play. And I think what you say about, you know, it gives them some non-verbal forms to sort of express and process their emotions seems really important. And one thing you've said to me, which I found really interesting, is that sometimes a parent will come in and have a very clear sense of what they believe their child is upset by or what the issues are. But then in art therapy, it might be different, actually. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that happens quite a lot. I think adults have a perception of how the child is, but 9 times out of 10 they'll come in and what's actually really upsetting them, it will be linked to their grief and bereavement, but it's more kind of, you know, maybe what's happening on a day-to-day. They're kind of cross and angry that maybe the parent that's left can't take them to school anymore. That really affects them. or that maybe, yeah, they have to be picked up from school by different people every day. That kind of makes them cross. So yeah, I think what they are experiencing is interesting on a very child level. And if, you know, you kind of give them, art therapy gives them the opportunity to kind of think about that and explore what it's like for them.
That's lovely. No, it seems really important. Can you say a little bit now about the way art therapy helps us to connect with the person who's died?
Yeah, I think we've touched a little bit on that with Gary's lovely blanket, but it just provides an amazing opportunity to make lots of different things that you can put into a memory box or just have around. I do a art therapy bereavement support group for children, and that's slightly different maybe from an individual art therapy session, where in an individual art therapy session I might kind of let the child lead, but the group sessions are a little bit more led by an activity, and so it might be yeah, memories, it might be thinking about the ways that we can connect to the person. And that's wonderful because the kids will bring different ideas, and then we create stuff. The Invisible String book, I'm sure lots of people know that book. I use that quite a lot in one session, where we actually do get a piece of string and let children kind of see what that means for them, attach things to the string that bring about connections, and it could be lots of different things. In music, could be animals that they see that remind them, lots of different bits on it.
That's lovely. And I think you told me once that one thing you ask in sessions is, where do you find your person? You know, that I think that's a beautiful question. You know, where is it you find their presence, that it sort of lights up to you? And art seems to be a really beautiful way of doing that, of kind of creating the presence of the person, of connecting with them, and also having, like Gary talked about earlier, if you have a set of drawings, you have a kind of journal of your experiences. You can see the way grief changes, it's up and down, and kind of reflect back on your feelings.
Yeah, I think it's really important to do that and allow the child to bring that in their own way, because we have perceived ideas of where a child might find their kind of loved one, but it will be really individual to them. So where is that? What and can we create that somehow in, you know, lots of different ways? You know, sunsets, like I said, or it's those small moments, isn't it, every day, where we kind of have a connection. And if we can bring that into the art therapy room and maybe kind of create something around that, then it's reminding the child that that's okay, that they can kind of come in and out of life.
Gary,
can I add something? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to add, Victoria, when you talk about the groups, the place it took me to is that with different children, like Gary's two children, or, you know, in a family, that often different children grieve in different ways. And so doing your art therapy is such a lovely, visible demonstration that there isn't a right or a wrong way. So one of the children may be very sad, and that's kind of accepted. But another, maybe teenager, will be like, I am not dealing with grief. I'm going to go and party. I mean, they couldn't in COVID, but, you know, I am going to go off, and I'm not going to be a bereaved child. I'm going to be a fun teenager like my mates. I don't want to be different. And within the family system, that can create enormous tension, because somehow one is doing the things that are approved of and one is like ignoring it. But actually beneath their behaviors is absolutely as much pain and loss. And so finding ways of expressing that as a family group is so vital and so important.
Yeah, I'm working with two siblings at the moment, and actually on the flip side of that, the younger one is able to bring much more than the older one, but the older one is feeding off his younger sibling. It's like, oh, this is okay.
Nice.
Oh yeah, right, okay, I can kind of tap into this, I can do this, because his brother's so free with that. It's interesting.
Gary, you had a really lovely comment that you shared before we started. I wonder if you wanted to share.
I was just coincidentally chatting to one of my widow friends this morning on WhatsApp, and they were talking about art therapy, even before they knew I was doing this today. And her son is about 7ish or whatever, and she said that he loves art therapy because it lets his mind wander freely, which I thought was a really lovely way of putting it, that you know, you don't feel like you're tied in by those thoughts, but it can just go places. I thought that was just an amazing observation from a child.
Yeah, and nothing's wrong in art therapy.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's all, you know, it's what there's going on for the child is out in the
one of the things I've said to people as well when we're talking about like doodling memories and stuff is something that we often forget about in grief is humor and remembering laughter and things like that, because we feel humor. You know, people have gone and, you know, oh, it's all negative, but they made us laugh when they were here, whatever. And one of the things to say, draw something that you remember about them that made you laugh. It's a happy memory, and then you can get that down on paper, like you've got it, and you can always pull the happy memory out. You know, things like that are so useful. And we often forget about those sort of things. And as you say, dark humor as well. Yeah, that happens too.
And they're annoying things.
Yes, get everything down. Yeah, absolutely.
Where they always finish the peanut butter, you know, or whatever it was.
Why did they never put their socks away? Whatever, that's sort of thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, and the way that emotions can turn up differently. I'm thinking also, Victoria, when you do, sometimes Victoria does just like an emoji task where people draw their emotions. And I think we've talked about before how not only does that allow kids to express things non-verbally, but also if you do something like anger, you see how differently it shows up for different kids, that it isn't the same. And I think that variety seems really important.
Yeah, and I think also, again, in a group setting, that's lovely because it's inviting all different ideas about what things are. But I was just thinking about, Gary, your daily scribbles. Like you could describe to somebody in words what you were feeling, but you would have no idea until you've shown them the picture, you know. And there's that connection of like, yes, that's what it feels like.
It's almost like permission. It is so hard sometimes to formulate words. You know, you think you've got to be a writer to use words or whatever, but you know. And I say, drawing, it can be a stick man. That's the thing. That's the thing I have to keep emphasizing. I'm lucky. I draw. That's what I do. But to do a doodle diary, to use something like that, stick men are fine. You could still communicate feelings and stuff through that.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier on about it's about colours and textures and shape, and I use clay a lot. It's the sensory as well, you know, using lots of, or even just paint on your hands on a page, just kind of allowing that connection with the feelings, and you know, what does that feel like? And that's okay. You could be angry on the page if you want to, in the clay.
I'm interested, I haven't talked to you about this before. One of the things when I did little workshops on this sort of thing as well, when I was running some for some people, and one of the things I said about art is I keep them in sketchbooks, and I've got the row on the shelf and it's great for the journey. But if you're not feeling, you know, you feel, oh, my art isn't worth looking at, you can still use it. If, for instance, if you've got like a day where you're feeling really bad and you want to do a dark scribble, do that scribble, go to bed, get it out, and the next morning, see that negative memory and then burn it or shred it or blow it away and let it evaporate naturally, and symbolically you're letting go of that little bit of negativity. You don't have to keep them in beautiful books. You can literally do a drawing and then get rid of it, process it in whatever way you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I run an adult group, and I always say you can leave your artwork here, you can take it home with you, or you can put it in the bin on the way out of the door. And everyone does different stuff. Some people duly come with a little folder and put it in and take it away and then bring it back, and others, I've got mountains of work that's produced over time and it's just there and they will never come and pick it up. But yeah.
I think this might lead us to a good place to introduce our second film, and Gary, you're going to be the one who cues it up. So this is Children, Grief and Art Therapy, which Victoria, Gary and I created together. And again, this is around 6 minutes long. And so we'll see you for more discussions and we'll get to your questions after this is over.
Children, Grief and Art Therapy.
All of the images you see have been made by clients who have given permission for them to be used, or images made by myself to use as an example. Art therapy uses creative processes to help us access and express our thoughts and feelings. It can be particularly helpful for bereaved children as it enables them to share their story in a safe and supported space. Using art enhances a child's ability to tell their story and to make sense of their experiences. Children should know that it is okay to talk about the person that has died and that they are still an important part of their family and who they are. In this image, children represented their families as groups of fish in an underwater scene. This gave the children an opportunity to share stories and memories about their loved one who had died. Art therapy gives children the opportunity to express their grief through art making, helping them to understand that their feelings are normal and that they do not need to hide them. Grief can feel overwhelming and confusing. Creating images allow children to express emotions like fear, anger, or worry. I encourage children to explore these complex feelings on the page rather than holding them inside. Every child's feelings and emotions about grief will be different, but the images allow an insight into the child's inner world. During a children's group session, we explored all the different feelings and emotions that we experience by using emoji faces. This allowed the children to talk about all their different emotions and to understand that they are all normal feelings to have. We also talked about who might be best to share these feelings with, especially all the big ones connected to the death of their loved one. Often the pain of grief can be so much that children cannot find words to describe their feelings, but the use of art materials allow a child to explore these feelings in colours, shapes, and textures. This image, made by a child in a session, shows what grief feels like to them on different days. For this child, a green day is when they have lots of different feelings all day. The red days are when they feel okay most of the day, but they might have a few big emotions that visit them that feel out of control. They talked about the yellow days being days where they don't know what they feel and things feel a bit confusing. The pink days are when good things have happened and they haven't thought about their grief. And blue days are days when they just feel sad. This image allowed us to really explore what grief was like for them, but most importantly, they were able to share this with their parent, and it gave them a way to let them know what kind of a day it had been. The process of making art is as important as the final image created. The physical experience of working with clay, paints, or pastels can unlock feelings and memories, helping us to connect to our emotions in an intuitive, sensory manner. Here you can see how a child can work with wet clay, the sensory feedback from squashing or squeezing it, pounding a fist into it, or making it smooth and silky, allow connections to feelings and a way to regulate the bigger overwhelming emotions grief can bring. Continuing the bonds the child has with the person that has died is an important part of their grief, along with the adjusting to their absence. I often use storybooks in sessions. The Invisible String is a story about connection and a great way to introduce an art activity that helps the child stay connected to the person that has died. You can see in these images how unique those connections are to the individual child, and this gives us once again an opportunity to share memories and talk about their loved one. Bereaved children can benefit hugely from opportunities to be creative, even without the support of an art therapist. The process of being immersed in an artistic activity can reduce anxiety and promote a sense of well-being. It has been shown that colouring books help both children and adults to manage painful emotions. A visual journal is a lovely way to incorporate many of the healing benefits of art making. A journal or collection of creative projects reveal aspects of our inner world and help us to see our experiences from a new perspective. A journal becomes a place outside of the child to express how they feel, reflect on what has happened to them, and make meaning of these experiences. The images made over time by children, either in a therapeutic space or at home, allow the child to look back, to recognise that their emotions change over time, and that the images gave them the ability to tell their story.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Gary. I've just been looking at the Q&A and quite a lot have come in, so I think we might just jump straight into them. The first one is from Kath. She writes that she's finding it difficult to find the words to tell my children that their dad took his own life last September. I've otherwise been very open with them and took them to see him in ICU before we turned off his life support. I've been careful not to lie, but full disclosure is so hard, especially as they are at very different developmental ages. My kids are 4, 7, and 9, and have also just lost their granddad, my dad, last month, which has brought up a lot of questions. Any advice? Julia?
I mean, goodness, it's tough, both the suicide and then your father dying, and that they are different. Their experience of it is different at different ages is absolutely right. But each child within the family need to know the same truth, because otherwise what is understood by a 9-year-old will feel confusing and dangerous and scary, but unvoiced with no narrative by a 4-year-old. And I mean, I don't know what Victoria and Gary think, but I think you need to tell them the truth incrementally over time. So you don't have to say everything at once. You know, I would start with, what do you understand about how daddy died? What is the knowledge that you have? What's the information that you have? And normally you can use that as your hook and go, yes, that's right. No, it wasn't quite like this. Actually, what happened is that he took his own life. And then slowly over time, by giving them opportunities to ask questions and you inputting the facts, it's how he killed himself, where he killed himself, what day, and what you understand by that. Often parents sort of say to children, you know, daddy really loved you. And the child goes, well, it doesn't feel like love when he killed himself. And so one of the ways that I talk about that with families is that suicide is like a heart attack of the brain, where all the neural kind of electrics in your brain kind of explode. It isn't really a choice or a decision. It's you know, where it's an explosion in your brain, and children can understand that. I would advise you to get proper support to do it, and to have someone with you when you're doing it. It's too hard to do this on your own.
That's really, really good. Victoria, do you want to add anything to that?
I was just thinking about then using an art activity together to so that the children and the mum can connect together as well. So doing art activities is wonderful to kind of connect, but also then there's a distraction also around the discussion sometimes as well. It's a bit easier. It could be a bit easier, and it could be anything.
And I guess the other thing to say is just that kids might ask the same questions over and over again. And it doesn't mean that you haven't explained it well the first time, that actually they sometimes need to hear the answer and go through that process over and over.
When you think that children need to be told 20 times to put their clothes away properly before they even vaguely understand. So when it's something this big, it's going to take even more to process, isn't it? So I think it's absolutely right. And each time they ask, they've got that little bit older and they've processed a bit more. So the answer each time is going to make more sense to them as well, I think.
Yeah. And to you.
Yeah. That's the other thing that people forget as well.
Dual process, reciprocal. You don't understand it. You can't make sense of it. You'll have all the same feelings as each other.
And being able to say you don't have all the answers is also fine. You know, that you don't always have to know everything and say, I'm not sure either. These are my these are my thoughts.
Yes.
We have a nice. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just say, and it is that story of continuing, and part of that, something happened that was quite traumatic, but actually their family is still there, and you're able to do that work together, and that moves on. It's part of their story.
Yeah. We have a question from Karen. Would you recommend having a place children take the art to give to the person who has died, so that they are sharing their feelings with them? A tree, daddy's office in the home, a planted rose bush in the garden. What are your thoughts, Gary?
This is I love this one. So we have several places for joy, and we have a stone in the garden that we can put things if we want to. That's in our garden. It's nice, and you can take things. We have a picture in the house, and if they want to put something, you could keep changing if you've got new things for them. I've got the other one which I particularly enjoy for us is we've got a tree of hers is in a public park. There's a lovely memorial tree, and sometimes, especially on things like Mother's Day, birthdays, whatever, we want to take something there. But I'm very aware I don't like this thing of like leaving printed cards and materials. It's basically littering, and I'm kind of. So what we do, we've got a bush in our garden that has these large waxy leaves, these really lovely, and we write messages and do little drawings with a little white gel pen on these leaves, and we take those to the tree and we put them around the bottom of the tree, so that then when weather comes they break down or they blow away, but they're organic, and you're producing art but on something organic that will then become part of nature again and part of that cycle that we're all over. We do that. That's our big one that we really enjoy doing.
That's lovely. Yeah.
And asking the children what they think.
Yeah.
Where would they like to take them? And
should we take something to the tree? Say, what do you want to write? You write something. You do a thing. And would you like somewhere to put something? And if they want something a bit more permanent, create a little space where they can have like their own little rotating gallery of whatever they want
in their bedroom.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question. How do you support a teenager whose parent is terminally ill, but you have been told they are not aware the parent is terminal, just that the parent is ill, and the young person doesn't like to talk about her parent's illness, but is struggling in day-to-day life? Julia.
I mean, this is about protection again. And of course, whatever anybody else says, yourself and your children best, and that is your kind of leading guide. From a research and experience perspective, every minute of the time that you have with the parent that's dying before they die is so precious and important, and you go back and live that for the rest of your life, so that if you don't have the opportunities to have the important conversations like, I love you, I'm going to miss you, tell me where you think you're going, or any of those things, that creates a double space, not only the presence of their absence after they've died, but the self-fury that you didn't use that time. And so protecting your child by protecting the person that's dying, you're doing a double disservice. I don't believe that the person who's dying doesn't know that they're dying. I think everyone is, of course I can't know that, but my guess is everyone is trying to protect each other. And in that, everyone has a kind of chilly isolation. And so again, it's the same answer every time, is that we all need to know the same truth as best we can. And we can learn to live with that.
And what's difficult for this person, I guess, is that they're not the family member. They're the friend of the family member. The family has taken one stance that they're not agreeing with.
So all she can do is say what her stance is, and then they have to choose for themselves what's best for them.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think also what you said before about asking, all of you said, asking the child what they understand might reveal that the child knows more than, the other parent thinks they do, and that might
They usually do, don't they?
They'll always know.
They always know.
Yeah.
And that's awful for the child to sit with, knowing stuff, and the parent, adults around them won't talk about it.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I want to squeeze in one more question. How can you help a teenager who's having to come to terms with the death of a parent by suicide and has to deal with the challenges of living with the other parent with long-term depression in a single home? How can you help them process the challenges within the relationship together and the joys they shared? And any book suggestions too. And I have seen that there's been a few book suggestions on the chat. A Monster Calls, The Year of the Rat, written novels about the death of a parent. But you said a little bit about this, but I wonder if you can say any more about supporting that teenager, and also when the parent, him or herself, is having, feeling depressed.
Victoria, why don't you suggest things?
Journaling comes straight to mind in terms of just for the child every day having somewhere to go to have the conversation. If they can't have the conversation, with the parent who can support them. Because
I would also say peer groups.
I was going to say we need a peer group.
I feel like often kids can't speak to their parents in the same way they can speak to other bereaved children. Absolutely. So if there's any way to get them into a group where they can share with somebody else who's slightly removed, whether it's a therapist or a peer group, that can be really helpful, because often they feel really isolated as well. No one else understands what I'm feeling. Everybody else has a mum and dad. And if they have other people, you were going to say something like that, Julia?
I completely agree. And Child Bereavement UK comes to mind, because we have a young person's group that people can join.
Excellent. We are over already by a minute. Unfortunately, it's just raced by. Such a wonderful panel and so many interesting things to discuss. I'm sorry for those of you whose questions we didn't get to. So all I have to say really is just to thank everyone who's attended, and also our wonderful panel for joining us today. To remind you, a recording of this session will be made available on the Grief channel in a bit. And also please do see the Good Grief resource page for more information and support. So
thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. So that's it for us. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time. So bye for now.
Bye.